Good morning. It is time for the Shakespeare Chapter 3. And this chapter is dedicated to my new buddy, Carson. Thank you so much for the email, Carson. So let's get started. Let's see what happens to Widge and this stranger that we met yesterday. I had no notion of where I was being taken. We headed south out of Berwick, past the slate-roofed house of Mr. Cheney, the wool merchant, past the old mill, past the common fields. I had been south as far as Wakefield. Beyond that, my geography was unreliable. I knew that if one continued south a week or so, one would end up in the vicinity of London. But I was sure this man was no Londoner. Judging from Dr. Bright's accounts, the men of London dressed in splendid clothing, all ornamented and embroidered, and spoke in a civil and cultured manner. They lived in houses 10 times larger and grander than Mr. Cheney's, and consorted with ladies of elegance and beauty. I had a hard time matching the stranger's pace. He never looked back to see whether I was keeping up or whether I was following at all. Yet I was sure that if I took it into my head to slip off into the dark woods, he would know at once. Besides, there were the woods themselves to be reckoned with. About Berwick, the woods were tame. The trees were broad and widely spaced. Sheep and pigs grazed on the swaths among them, and on my rare free afternoon I had walked there without fear. These woods were dense and dark and dreadful. To run there would be like jumping into the fire to escape the cooking pot. Those trees, I had heard, concealed every unsavoury brigand and every ravenous beast of prey in the shire, until nightfall, when they ventured out upon the roads such as this in search of victims. I shuddered, and breaking into a trot, closed the gap between myself and the stranger's horse. When I grasped the frame of his saddle, I could shuffle along with less effort. Still, I was not used to physical exertion, and the pace took its toll on me. I summoned enough breath to say, "Will we be stopping for the night, then?" The man twisted in his saddle and glanced down at my hand clutching the frame. I was afraid he might push me away, but he faced front again. "Speak when you are spoken to," he said in a low voice. We pushed along after the last night was gone from the watery sky. I hoped that we might put up at the King's Head in Wakefield, but we passed by without pausing. From there, the road was unfamiliar to me, though its ruts and rocks felt all too familiar. The bottoms of my shoes, which were thin as paper, grew ragged. At last I trod on a sharp stone that pierced the leather sole, and the sole of my foot as well. Gog's blood! Losing my grip on the saddle, I fell to my knees on the hard dirt. The stranger wheeled his horse about. "Silence!" he hissed. "You'll have every cut-purse within a league down upon us." "Sorry," I whispered. "I've hurt myself." He sighed in disgust. "Can you walk?" I tried to place my weight on the injured foot. It was like stepping on a knife. "I wish not." "If I give you the flat of my blade, can you?" I considered a moment and took a sharp breath. "Nay, I still wish not." He reached out for me, and instinctively I ducked. "Give me your hand." His voice was harsh and impatient. Hesitantly, I put my hand in his. Despite the clammy air, his palm was hot and dry, like that of a man with a fever, and his grip was painfully strong. He lifted me bodily and dragged me across the horse's flank until I could swing one leg over the animal's haunches. I had scarcely settled in before we were off again at a quicker gait than before. I dropped my bundle in my lap and clung desperately to the saddle frame. After a time I relaxed a bit and even felt drowsy. My head drooped forward and came to rest on the shoulder's damp cloak. He jerked violently as though bitten, and I sat abruptly erect again. Despite all my care, this happened several more times. Finally, the man snapped, "Either ride properly or go back to Shank's mare," meaning, of course, my feet. As the night advanced, the air grew more chill, which helped keep me uncomfortably awake. In the small hours, we came upon an inn. My master took a room. I was given a pallet on the floor and was awakened long before I was ready the following morning. A loaf of bread and some cheese served as both breakfast and dinner. Each was eaten unceremoniously upon the back of a horse. We paused once in the afternoon to allow the animal to drink from a stream. I barely had time to soak my swollen foot before we were on our way again. When night fell, we were once more beset by woods on either hand, and no settlement in sight before or behind. What drove this man so, I wondered, to risk his life and mine in the high road after dark? We were too near the end of our journey to stop. All the preceding night and day I had been in a sort of daze, brought on by the abrupt change in my circumstances. Now I was beginning to come out of it, and 100 thoughts and questions rose in me, none of which I dared give voice to. All I could do was what I had always done: wait and watch and hope for the best. The trees edged in and threatened to claim the very road. In places their branches met above our heads and interlaced, nearly blocking out the light of the half moon. In one such dismal spot we got our first taste of trouble. There was no warning. One moment the road was deserted, dappled with moonlight. The next, half a dozen shadowy figures stood before us. I stiffened and a gasp escaped me. Instead of turning back or spurring a horse in a bed for escape, the stranger reined in and slowly approached the bandits, who stood in a crescent blocking the path. Most were armed only with staves and short swords, but one man of imposing stature held a crossbow levelled at us. "Hold!" The stranger led his horse advance until we were nearly abreast of the big man. "God rest you, gentlemen," he said in a surprisingly amiable tone. The big man, crowded by our horse, let his crossbow drift to one side. "Don't tell me you're a parson." "Far from it." "Good, I don't like doing business with parsons. They're too parsimonious." Ha 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 ha! He guffawed at his own joke. "Well, let's have it then." "Have what?" the stranger asked innocently. The big man laughed again, and this time his companions joined him. "Have what, he says. Have what? Why, have a pot of ale with us, course." More soberly the man said, "Come on now. Enough pleasantries, let's have your purse." The stranger reached inside his cloak and drew out the purse with which he had bought me. It was still heavy with coins. "Forgive me for not taking your meaning." "Oh, aye," the big man said. "And you forgive us for taking your money." The stranger leaned down as if to surrender the pouch, but instead he swung it in a sudden arc and struck the bandit full in the face. The man staggered backward. His crossbow loosed his bolt, which flew wild. I gave a cry of dismay as the other thieves sprang forward. But the stranger was ready. The hand that had held the purse an instant before now grasped his rapier. He kicked the nearest man's stave aside and gave him a quick thrust to the throat. A second man's sword he deflected with its cloak and sent the man reeling away, clutching at his bloody face. He seized the blade of a third man's weapon in his cloak-wrapped hand and yanked it away. I, meantime, was struggling with a one-armed ruffian who had latched onto my tunic and was trying to pull me to the ground. I clung tenaciously to the saddle frame and kicked at my assailant, but it was no use. My small strength gave out, and I toppled like a wounded bird from my perch. Flailing about for something to break my fall, I fastened on the neck of the one-armed man. He cursed and stumbled backward, and we both crashed to the ground. A rock struck my elbow, numbing my arm. It did even more damage to the bandit's head, and he lay suddenly still. I dragged my limp arm free and got to my feet to see the stranger dispatch the last of the outlaws with a sweeping blow that knocked the man to the road, where his companions lay in various attitudes and degrees of unconsciousness. The stranger guided the horse to where the crossbow lay. With a flick of his blade he severed its string, then lifted his fallen purse with the point of the sword. He shook a single coin from it and tossed it at the feet of the big man, who sat ruefully holding his jaw. "If this is a toll road, you might simply have told me." The big man let out an abrupt laugh, "Ha ha ha!" then groaned with pain. "Would that you had been a parson after all." Several of the bandits had begun to come round about now. "Could we go on?" I pleaded. The stranger twisted about impatiently and grasped the back of my tunic, hoisted me up behind him. Though I kept a wary eye on the thieves, he did not deign to glance back even once. Only when they were well out of sight did I breathe easily again. "What you did back there, I'd never seen the like." The stranger was silent a long moment. Then he said gruffly, "You were told not to speak unless spoken to." And that is the end of chapter 3. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and grant you his peace.